Welcome to everyone online. My name is Jabu. I am an architect and lecturer in the architecture department. I'll be moderating today. Let's present today's topic. So the seminar synopsis, we are going to be discussing today what does it mean to teach and learn disciplines such as architecture, planning, urban studies, and urban geography in solidarity with communities. We are fortunate to be joined by all of the stakeholders that we're discussing today, so we really do look forward to that. What does it mean for communities to host such endeavours? This session reflects on engaged pedagogies emerging from the City Studio, considering how transect walks, collective ethnographic fieldwork, co-production and reciprocal learning unsettle the university's boundaries. We will be paying particular attention today on whether it is possible for students and educators and residents to co-create new ways of thinking and making the city. So the format that we'll have is we have a panel of 4 people, and then we have, as I mentioned, guests who are here who will be contributing from the City Studio area. So we really do welcome them and look forward to that engagement. And then we have online respondents who I will also introduce. But I just want to let you know who'll be talking holistically, and then we'll begin. So we will begin with a presentation by Dr. Paulo Moreira. He's an architect, a researcher, a postdoctoral Centennial Fellow at the Center for Urbanism and Built Environment Studies, CUBES, here at the School of Architecture and Planning. His work looks at reciprocities in the Kelvin-Alexandra-Frankenwald City Studio area and explores how communities, materials, and urban infrastructure interact. We'll be starting with Paulo, and then next, on my left, we have Dr. Sarita Pillay Gonzalez. She is a lecturer in the Geography Department at Wits. Her work explores themes related to real estate, spatial justice, heterogeneous and racialized financial and capital flows, and state polymorphism. Sarita was previously a popular educator and researcher in spatial justice campaigns in Cape Town. We're also joined by Fredricks on my far right. He is a BSc URP honors student at Wits. He's conducting research on commuting patterns. His 2024 coursework in the City Studio nurtured a strong interest in water and waste practices at the City Studio site and their role in shaping engaged pedagogies. Ethan follows activities of the City Studio, enriching them with incisive, critical questions. And then on my right, we have Jabu Makhubu. He is a lecturer. He's a lecturer, researcher, curator, architectural and urban designer, a PhD candidate with over 10 years of teaching experience. His work investigates radical spatial pedagogies, African urbanism, decolonization, and queer politics in architecture. Alongside teaching and publishing, he's been instrumental in international collaborations, secured research grants, and remains deeply involved in design practice. Then we have Nqobile Malaza. She is an urban and development planner who has over 15 years of experience in academia and practice in South Africa and Eswatini. Nqobile's research is on the empowerment of women through small and medium enterprises. Her innovative and transformative teaching at Wits University has inspired and emancipated a generation of young planners. So that is our panel who will be giving presentations. There'll be some material that will be posted online as well. And then our discussants to that material, we're joined online by Dr. Bernadette Johnson. She is a Director of Transformation and Employment Equity at Wits and a Research Associate in Education Leadership with 30 years in higher education and senior management. She researches governance and development, supervises postgraduate studies, and advises internationally on urban development, leadership, mediation, and coaching. And then Juan Cristaldo, who is also joining us online. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. He's a research director and co-founder at the Center, for Research, Development, and Innovation at the Architecture, Design, and Art School in the National University of Xi'an. His research covers urban policy, urban territorial development, catalytic potential of infrastructure, and open source or open data photography. Okay, so with that, let's get started. Dr. Paulo Moreira, please begin your presentation.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everyone. I'm Paulo. I'm a postdoc researcher working here at Hughes, and particularly in the project called City Studio, which we all heard about. So, and my presentation will reflect on how engaged pedagogies emerge when learning happens with communities. It explores what I recently titled in an article, "Unlearning by Doing," a hands-on process often referred to as learning by doing, but here it's reinterpreted through the colonial pedagogy grounded in reciprocity, uncertainty, and collaboration. Most of you or all of you are already familiar with Xuetla. This is a informal settlement on the banks of the Uxbel River. But I'm showing it here again because it also locates the two safety shelters we've built together with local builders and the patrollers and the support of the local leadership in Xuetla. And these are the two images of two shelters we've built, and I'm gonna send them a little bit more detail in terms of the relationship to this topic of pedagogy, engaged pedagogies. Well, as an outsider, as someone not even from South Africa, this experience meant questioning the conventional role of universities when facing complex social and urban conditions. I believe this has been it has also been like this to many of the participants in the project, even the South Africans that are not so familiar with a place like Xuetla. And the hands-on experience brought closer this idea of practical research. It became not simply a form of learning through making, but actually unlearning. And I'm also gonna stay. I'd like you to keep that idea in mind throughout the presentation, idea of unlearning. One of the key community actors in the project were the Page Xuetla patrollers, a group who emerged early in our field work, but also in our engagement as part of the launch event at the Marlborough Station. You see here an image of that moment when we created an interactive kind of process where we asked people to write down what the City Studio could do, what we imagine the City Studio could tackle for those following 2 years, let's say. This was in May 2024. And some highlighted safety as a critical concern and something that the City Studio should try and address. Based on this, we developed an initiative to consider how spatial design could respond to the question of safety. Together with the patrollers and leaders, we select those sites. We worked on an application to a program funded by the Urban Safety Reference Group and the South African Cities Network to work with local builders to then co-produce these structures, these small-scale, modest, but yet visible and dignified structures for local patrollers. And here are some images of the construction itself, and the patrollers actually being involved in the process with the local builders as well. another one, and then but I wanted to go back a little bit to also to show how we build up that experience that resulted in those two structures. Our approach, rather than treating this as a conventional design project or a commission, the initiative became a collective making platform, a platform for learning collectively, involving artisans, builders, organizations, and students. And we've done just before the safety shelters in Jabu, we've organized basically a design build workshop here at John Moffat Courtyard, where students and the local artisans and the Alexandra Water Warriors work together to transform discarded materials into a shared structure. We also at that time organized collective mapping workshops in Shweta and Alexandra, where we identified key sites. We learned about the perceptions of safety and crime hotspots. You can see that image on the right through these stickers and creating a not so technical map, but more like a perceptive map that helped us to understand issues the site. And these exercises also became spaces for storytelling, of reciprocal learning, but also of negotiation, where partnerships were formed, expectations evolved, and even roles blurred between who is learning and who is teaching. I guess I would say everyone was involved in that case. We later organized what we call the Safety Shelter Summer School, in which students developed collaborative representations of the shelters. But they could not participate in the on-site construction itself due to timing, but also mostly to insurance and indemnity constraints that we felt here in the university level, let's say. But we instead brought artisans into campus to share their knowledge and reverse the usual flow of expertise, when we go to the site. In this case, the experts came to us to train our students how to make, build, how to weld, everything. Now, shifting from method to reflection, this idea of learning by doing is not enough when working in a contested place such as Twitter. This required an act of unlearning, of confronting institutional and positional assumptions. These are some references that stuff we can look at. Also, I shared some Ubuntu philosophy, which was also an important factor here to reinforce this ethos, to situate our work within mutual respect and relational ethics. And learning by doing means embracing a collaborative approach, and it deals with uncertainty, with failure, even with discomfort, as integral parts of pedagogy. It resists this linear model of basing a design and an implementation, inviting instead a situated process of going along, of embracing informality and constant negotiation. Of course, this negotiation is complex. Working between the university and Schwedler meant constantly translating between these two very different systems. On one side, a formal protocol with ethics clearance, with funding regulations and safety standards and like that. But on the other hand, we had to deal with the issues of protecting local labor, improvisation, urgent community needs. And I have to say that this SACN funding structure, for instance, prohibited payment for labor, as part of the regulations they had for that program. So that led us to adapt a kind of gift voucher economy system where, it was a well-intended model, but it also generates tensions around compensation, fairness, and sometimes expectations that people had in being part of this. Other instances included a dispute over land, and this escalated at some point to the placement of toilets around the shelter, its image, and even endangered a community member involved in this action. These have since been removed, but the community member and her family have to leave Shredder, actually. I don't know if this is the sole reason for that, but I just wanted to bring up these frictions because this forces us to rethink processes and how spatial politics unfold in the community. And it's clear that engagement cannot idealize a consensus, a community consensus, but it also idealizes how our knowledge production or our knowledge is partial. It's always partial when living in the project like this. We think we organize things, but there's always some unexpected circumstances that unfold. And I'm just about to conclude, but I wanted to show you some of the post-occupancy images in these safety shelters. But there are some many positive aspects of how these shelters became used since completion. They have taken on unexpected lives as shaded meeting points, spaces of informal trading, of places of care used by most men, women, and children to play. And so they become community spaces, not only places for the community controllers, but actually for everyone. These initiatives also resonate into the university. It inspired new collaborations. For instance, with the first year students here at the School of Architecture, this is an image of students co-produced structures with the community artisans, reusing locally sourced materials. And currently, we are also working with Sandra Felix's third year design studio, where we are constructing the City Studio final exhibition. Again, alongside with the artisans. This is an image of the warehouse where we source the materials in Frankenwald, which is next to the warehouse where the exhibition will take place, opening on the 28th of October. So I invite you once again for that event. And yeah, I just wanted to conclude to say that these spin-offs show how engaged pedagogy can expand into institutional practice in itself and kind of prior to projects that can develop from here. I'd say that we strive to move beyond the university's enclosure, even or especially if this means embracing uncertainty. We can do this through practice by recognizing that practical knowledge emerges through friction and care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paulo. That was a very inspiring presentation. I've also had taken students to Fredricks as part of last year's research, and I've witnessed those moments of genuine enlightenment that students have about their own surroundings. Which I think that raises questions about, and really points to the importance of this kind of studio and this kind of project. Something else, I think that it's really interesting, this challenge that you pointed out about actually using the research structures that are in place to do this type of work. It kind of indicates that there's a gap between how we are geared to facilitate research and the kind of research that we actually want to do. So, thank you for highlighting that. And then, of course, the genuine reciprocity that we see in students being able to do the kind of basic building that they may not be able to do in their local surroundings, that they are able to do just by kind of forming a collaboration like this. So thank you very much. That was very, very inspirational. We are going to move on to Dr. Sarita today, and there's also a presentation for that, I believe.
That's workable. Thank you so much, Paulo, and thank you everyone for coming here today. I would say maybe less so than Paulo. I'm really still trying to make sense of everything that my class did and went through. I'm hoping to use this opportunity to reflect on the process and maybe to get some thoughts out from folks here today. So please bear with me, but also I think there were some really important themes that came through from Paulo's presentation that I think resonate quite strongly with the experience I had. So I am a lecturer in geography here at Wits. I'm part of the City Studio and I'm part of Cubes. And the courses that I teach are very much embedded in cities and the urban. The one course that kind of was engaging with the city was a course on food security. And the course is actually called Food Security, Politics and Culture. That's the full title. And in geography, we have a practical component, so quite similarly, where for 3 hours a week on one day, students are expected to engage some kind of practical activity. In this case, something that we realized was that at an honors level, students are expected to come up with these research projects, but often they haven't had the exposure to research methods, or they haven't really thought carefully about how it is you do research and your kind of position as a researcher. So through this and other courses, we try and integrate research methods into third year, so before they become honors and postgrad students. And there was an idea through chats that I had with colleagues through being in the City Studio, that there was an opportunity to engage with the City Studio as my third year course to understand the relationships that people in Johannesburg have to food. Because the City Studio is a very uniquely located place, but also a microcosm, as we've been describing throughout this whole series. It represents a lot of the complexities of South Africa and cities in South Africa. So for this City Studio engagement that my class was going to undertake, we thought through how is it that we can speak to people and possibly interview people in the City Studio in a way that will allow us to understand the relationships that ordinary people have to big food companies. So in our course, we conceptualize big food as your big retailers, your Pillay, your ShopRites, your Macros, your Woolworths, even to a lesser degree, but your big supermarket chains, as well as your big fast food companies, your KFCs, your Romans, your McDonald's. So we understand that as big food. So we thought in the class, and also through speaking to Marie, to Paulo, to Mike, to other people that are embedded in the City Studio, I was trying to think about how is it that my students could interview people to understand their relationships to big food, but also step a bit outside of their comfort zones, because in previous years, they had mostly just interviewed students. And although we know that there is a spectrum of experiences among students, that students are not homogenous, that there are very kind of different experiences and relationships to food that exist among students as a group, we found that they tended to do most of their interviews in res or with people on campus, and that they really didn't challenge themselves sometimes to interview people that were of a different age or perhaps weren't within their immediate friend group. So through this and through a few failed attempts to, speak to potential, there was one big, large grocery company, I won't name names, but that we knew that a lot of people in the City Studio did their shopping for bulk shopping. And I approached them and asked if they'd be willing for us to come and interview people in the parking lot or outside, and we got a flat no. But through engagements with the Alex Mall management, they were very open to the idea. Surprisingly, we didn't expect it actually as students. And the mall manager, Nqobile particularly, was fabulous in facilitating this. And the mall was very interested in having our students come and spend 3 hours on 2 days, basically the 7th and 8th of August 2025, to interview folks in the mall. And I warned them beforehand. I said, look, they need to do something, or they're not necessarily going to want to speak to you. So don't take offense, go in with hard skin, just be ready for whatever it is you encounter. And surprisingly, the opposite happened. So over those 2 days, my students ended up doing over 80 interviews. And I think we underestimated how willing people were going to be to speak to them. But it also ended up being a very transformative experience for students in the sense that they were really pushed out of their comfort zone. Many of them said that they were introverts and never thought they would have the courage to approach people in a mall just randomly cold, because of course you don't have a rapport or anything, so you just have to go in and interview or ask people if they'll give you 15, 20, 30 minutes of their time, and surprisingly many people did. And some of the narratives and stories and engagements that the students had were they expressed as being quite transformative for them. So, and also the fact that people were very willing to speak to them makes me realize that there was something here that is worth expanding on and exploring more. So you won't be able to see those here, but I've put together some of the students' reflections on this experience. And here there's some examples of students who are saying that they were very happy because they could interview people in their home language. And others realized that they never realized it was such an asset to be multilingual, what benefit that would be in an interview or kind of research environment. Others said they realized the barriers to not speaking multiple languages and felt as if this was an opportunity or moment for them now to intentionally try and learn how to speak multiple languages. Other students said they experienced discomfort. So discomfort was part of that, in the sense that they had to come out of their shells and approach people they would ordinarily not. And they said, I'm an introverted person, not really someone who likes to initiate conversation because I'm fearful of bothering people. But I learned that I'm actually quite friendly, and that tends to appeal well to others. I've also learned that people are generally easygoing, and they don't necessarily have a reason to be mean or judgmental. So people were, I think there was some surprise really at the willingness of people in the mall to sit down and have conversations with the students. Another reflection from one of the students, I learned that connection is often easier than it seems to be, despite contrasting backgrounds, privileges, and interests. Using the interview as a foundation, it was quite easy to connect and even relate to vastly different kinds of people. And another student said, I've been underexposed to the realities of South African people when it comes to the food system. I learned how important it is to be more inquiring and also aware of what's going on around me. So very, very vast engagements. I mean, very, very kind of, I think, quite profound reflections by the students. And just to wrap up, the second part of what students did through this course was a workshop at the Makhubu Community Food Garden, which many of you are familiar with. And this, again, I think relates to something that Paulo said about reversing the usual flows of expertise. And when you said that roles are blurred between who is learning and who is teaching. And something that we have learned from students in previous courses is that they were frustrated that in this food course, they were learning about food in theory, but they never did anything practical when it came to food. They felt that we were learning about agroecology, but they wouldn't know how to plant something if they needed to. So based on that previous feedback, there was an intent to see how could we have a more hands-on food-related exercise, and through relationships that we had with Mr. Mapunyane that have existed in the City Studio through work by Marie and Paulo, and engagement since late last year, actually, and the event we had at Marlborough, we built this plan. We kind of came up with this plan where Mr. Mapunyane came up with a workshop that would be facilitated by the local farmers on that community-run food garden, who would teach the students things like mulching, how to raise bed construction, how to recycle organic waste. And that proved to be quite an engaging experience. I think students were a bit bewildered. Some of them who had never tried to plant things before. Others found it very familiar and had experiences of that. But again, I think that was kind of an interesting engagement, but also for students, I think it also pushed them outside of their comfort zone and perhaps put them in a position where they were having to grapple with how little they knew often about these things. So just in ending, I think questions that I'm interested to understand better, and I see Mr. Mapunyane is in the audience. I'm not sure if Mbali is here, but to understand what does this mean, who is this benefiting. The students did come up with research projects, so that is a QR code there, but maybe I'll pass that around and you can get access to the projects that they came up with. So they did come up with projects and kind of analyze data. They picked up some really interesting trends around how important affordability is, that most people are making decisions around food based on what they can afford, that people buy from informal traders and big food retailers, that both are important to ensure people's food security. But what will become of this research? Is it useful? I'm very cognizant of the fact that it came from the course. It wasn't something that was co-produced. And although some boundaries are broken, were they boundaries that were actually also built through this process? So this is really the phase that I'm in now with my students, is reflecting on this process and what it means, and hopefully to get some thoughts and feedback from all of you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think, again, another really, it's inspiring in the sense that research methodologies are normally, the way they land with students is normally as something quite dry and fixed and stale, and to actually introduce research methodologies in a way that is, number one, so relevant to their daily life and experience that they can really inhabit the process. I think that's really compelling as an idea and as an exciting pedagogy to explore further. And I think quite appropriately on that note, let us hear from the students. Ethan Fredricks, please.
Thank you very much. I'd love to expand particularly on the fact that I approach this sort of presentation as a sort of brief, as a student would. And to answer the question that the topic of the seminar is, which is it possible for students, educators, and residents to co-create new ways of thinking and making the city? And sort of breaking down this question in 3 questions of what does it mean to teach and learn disciplines such as architecture, planning, urban studies, and urban geography in solidarity with communities? And what does it mean for communities to host such endeavors? And finally, looking at the different methodologies of the City Studio in order to understand Swetla as we have. It is important to note that I'm not a part of City Studio. I was sort of enacted into it in third year, similarly to what the Dr. Sarita had spoken about in planning third year, where we have a course for politics in planning, and that course was in hopes of preparing us for our honors research report. And the case study was Sarita. The group that I was a part of focused particularly on the water and waste management practices of salons and childcare. And those projects, because I mean, we focus on water, a lot of other people focus on food security and on other aspects of Sarita. And we were able to exhibit it at one of the opening events for the City Studio. And that for me was my sort of introduction to the City Studio, and also subsequent engagement. I had the privilege of being able to ask questions and debate and have discussions about it. And yes, that's what informing my perspective today, the student perspective. Just moving into what does it mean to teach and disciplines such as planning, particularly in solidarity with communities. And I think throughout this year and also the 3 years of the planning degree, I know that the solidarity with communities can be understood in 3 ways. You know, it's learning as a guest, it's practicing humility, and understanding this reciprocal learning as a sort of standpoint to do research on. I mean, I recall in our first year, second year, and third year, on site analysis projects that we had in planning, we were told to go examine the Beer Street in Braamfontein and understand the urban in order to make decisions and redesign for what can be improved. And a big part that I know our lecturers spoke about was the fact that it's not enough for you to look at an aerial plan and sort of examine it and recite what you observe. It is important to understand the context. And looking in the idea of solidarity, doing research and learning and teaching in solidarity with communities, I think it is exactly that, which is reflected throughout this years of the degree. It's that idea that you need to understand beyond the fact that, you know, the street width is this, and it is, according to the Red Book, you know, wide enough for the people that live there. It's understanding the fact that the people there have particular needs, have particular desires, and understanding that is integral to understanding the urban and therefore redesigning or improving. You know, moving into what does it mean for communities to host such endeavors? You know, as a student, you're taught from second year, third year, and honors, the need for ethics and the need for knowing exactly where you stand. And there's a danger in that. There's a danger, I mean, even in third year, our lecturer had warned us, you know, you're not actually getting ethics clearance for this research, but you need to ensure that you're doing this properly and you're respecting people's bounds. And at least from the outside perspective, looking into City Studio, I think that was an integral part of what City Studio stood for, is that it wasn't just a mere research that is almost sometimes interpreted as extractive and something that is just quite using people's experience to just get data, but instead seeing it as a sort of a relationship with the people that you're engaging with and understanding the need for that relationship to get what you hope to achieve from that. It's, I think, important to acknowledge the fact that communities risk a lot bringing researchers in and allowing them to take up space within their spaces. And from what I could observe, it's been received quite well, the fact that the community members within Svetla are able to allow people in, but also engage with them in a way that they don't need to. Yeah. And just getting into the different sort of methodology that the City Studio went into and my sort of interpretation of that. the transient walks that we had gone. I hadn't particularly gone on the one with the City Studio, but I had gone with the third year class of planners, where we had gone through the thing with the same community that the City Studio went in. And I found that the sort of the textures of the participants' vibes were much more easily received compared to being able to look at a map and sort of call people and understand and do research online. Being able to walk the streets of Sarita and understand in that context changed the perspective completely. Suddenly the site is no longer just an object, but it's a conversation partner. It's a classroom that just has no walls. You're able to learn from everything. Getting into the collective ethnographic fieldwork, I can only compare that to a project that we had within honors for design, which was the site in Botswana, where we were split up into groups and we were told to understand the urban. The urban of a completely different country. And that, to me, within the City Studio, the relevance of it is being comfortable with uncertainty, being able to sort of move forward with the fact that I will figure it out, having patience and practicing that ethics throughout and understanding other people's perspectives in order to move forward in that way. Moving into co-production, it was important within our projects within planning as well as the City Studio, the fact that students were, as I said before, not extractors, but co-creators of this collective information that we gathered. Planning was done with the people that we were researching and not done for. Breaking down this wall between the experts and the people being researched. Yeah. Looking into the reciprocal learning, it's as a concept, it changes learning from this sort of we are planners and we are sort of coming into your space and learning from you, but instead coming into that space and knowing that we have something to give each other. That is an important part of planning throughout, I think, being able to engage with people, knowing that we're able to share between experts and people that are on the ground. This is through the storytelling workshops that occurred within our project, within City Studio, as well as the photo exercise and the collective mapping workshops. Being able to share that expertise that people are able to tell the stories, the lived realities of that. And lastly, looking at unsettling university boundaries, understanding research to not just be the idea of sitting in a room and discussing what those people over there are doing on their daily basis, but instead understanding the need for dialogue, the need for being in the field, and the need for uncertainty in order to actually understand the fabric of a particular urban. And yeah, to wrap up, answering the question, is it possible for students and educators and residents to co-create new ways of thinking and making the city? And I think we can definitely say yes, particularly with the examples that City Studio have shared on what students have done, what researchers have done to actually contribute, and also what the community was able to share with the students. So thank you.
Thank you, Ethan. I think thank you for lingering on the idea of solidarity. I think many of us have been horrified, those of us who graduated and gone on into practice, many of us have been horrified at the distance between the models we learned and what people actually want or need. So it's really great to hear you really reflecting on and valuing the fact that you're getting a different kind of experience. It's great to hear you acknowledge the efforts of your teachers in providing something for you that's actually going to be actionable once you do actually graduate. And then we will be moving on now to Jabu Makhubu. Please, may you go ahead.
Thank you, Nqobile and Sanbolani. I did not participate in the City Studio, so similar to Ethan, I'm going to be representing something that's maybe on pedagogy than on City Studio. And it's a project, well, part of the work I used to do when I was at the University of Johannesburg, where I taught in a postgraduate unit called Unit 15X. And in there, I think I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I also have not prepared a presentation, but in these documents, you might find some references to our methods and what we were able to do related to this topic today. So my contribution to this panel, and excuse me, is just to make sure that I don't go over time. I've prepared a short sort of written presentation. My contribution to this panel on engaged pedagogy is based on the work of Unit 15X, a postgraduate architecture design studio at the Graduate School of Architecture at the University of Johannesburg, where I taught before I moved to SOAP 2 years ago. Moreover, my contribution responds to the single question: what does it mean to teach and learn in solidarity with communities? For me, solidarity begins when teaching itself becomes a shared act, when knowledge is co-authored through presence, conservation, and collective reflection. Collaboration is more than a technique, it is a method of practice. In Unit 15X, each year's studio transforms through new institutional partnerships. This approach challenges the rigidity of architectural curricula by treating collaboration as an evolving pedagogy, one that acknowledges uncertainty, values multiplicity, and situates design within lived realities. It replaces the model of the expert delivering content with that of a community of learners building meaning together. This philosophy was tested through the 2019 DAR Open Space Upgrading Project, where which we refer to as a knowledge exchange, which was a collaboration between Unit 15X, RD University in Tanzania, the President's Office, Regional Administration and Local Government, which is a Tanzanian government body that is responsible for strengthening governance, improving service delivery, and fostering sustainable development across Tanzania. It was a project that was funded by the World Bank as an exchange between these two institutions. Our collaboration was also interdisciplinary, involving postgraduate architecture students from UJ and undergraduate urban planning students from RD University. It was facilitated by a team of architects, landscape architects, urban designers, urban planners, government officials, community representatives, and project coordinators. We began with a trip to Tanzania where 14 students and 3 staff members from Unit 15X spent 3 weeks conducting field work with our RD counterparts, working across 3 pilot sites in Dar es Salaam, Nazimoja, Magomeni, and Mwembeyanga. The precinct sought to strengthen the disciplines of urban and landscape design in Tanzania through this academic studio model. The project was conceived as a South-to-South partnership, positioning African universities as equal producers of knowledge and as co-interpreters of urban transformation. Mixed groups of students from both universities collaborated closely with residents, municipal officers, traders, and youth coalitions. They conducted interviews, site observations, participatory mappings, learning not only about the urban form, but also the social infrastructure that sustains it. Students and staff were opening their minds to different ways of educational processes. This immersion transformed the city into a live curriculum, dissolving boundaries between fieldwork, classroom, and community. Our pedagogical structure drew from Sweyer and Spencer's 5 C's or framework for collaboration. That is clarifying purpose, convening the right people, cultivating trust, coordinating activities, and collaborating for systems impact. In our case, convening the right people meant expanding beyond academic actors to include artists, traders, civil officials, and the everyday users of our space, the spaces we're engaged in. A particular revealing dialogue occurred with Farouk Abdallah in Zanzibar, a Zanzibarian fashion designer who introduced students to the city through the idiom of clothing, a metaphor for layering, adaptation, and cultural production. Such moments redefined who counts as a teacher and what counts as knowledge. Students developed their ideas through dialogic drawings and visual narratives, combining analytical maps with speculative imagery. These were not presentations of solutions, but visual conversations that raised questions about gender, religion, informality, and temporal use of public space. These categories of critical visual analysis became central to the pedagogy, positioning representation as a method of thinking rather than as a mere depiction. Through such collective drawings, students learned to negotiate meanings visually, ethically, and socially. The outcome of this process was not a single design solution, but a transformation of how students think about design. They began to move from being objects to designing relationships, from mapping space to reading social lives. Students integrated hydrology, ecology, and everyday use, acknowledging that good public spaces and those that can adapt, absorb, and evolve. This represents a pedagogy of relational evilism, attentive to process, to context, and to coexistence. The process was reciprocal. In July 2019 of the same year, RD students traveled to Johannesburg for a week-long knowledge exchange. Here, they examined Johannesburg's open spaces from Thokoza Park in Soweto to Freedom Park in Pretoria and engaged with city park officials and practitioners. These encounters foregrounded comparative learning and critical self-reflection. Students valued the opportunity to see and to discuss another context from a different point of view. Of course, collaboration reveals contradictory and sometimes challenging issues. Institutional calendars had to be really looked into, differing resources, the disciplinary languages and boundaries that were created by these two different disciplines. These moments of discomfort were productive. They surfaced the politics of knowledge and the uneven geographies of academic exchange. We viewed this as a countercultural moment, a step into unknown territory. For students and educators alike, this uncertainty became a space of unlearning, of mutual accountability. So in closing, engaged pedagogy for me is not an outreach or a co-presence. It insists that teaching be conducted with communities and not for them. It redefines expertise as collective and iterative, allowing the city itself to function as a site of instruction. When we approach the studio as a public space, and when residents become co-authors of design thinking, pedagogy transforms into a practice of solidarity. This is what it means, I believe, to teach and learn in relation to others, to allow our methods, our languages, and our authority to be remade by the city we serve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jabu. I think really all of the emphasis of every presentation has been so good, which is really great. It was so interesting to hear your emphasis on stakeholders and this idea that there's no one stakeholder that can do it alone, that everyone has a really important contribution to make, from the government to the students to the city, in the studio as a public space, which is a really exciting idea. And then, of course, another thing that really stood out is you know, in the topic we spoke about unsettling university boundaries, but you seem to be talking about dissolving university boundaries, you know, in this, to allow the necessary exchange to actually, so that the insights of the university actually really take root in South African realities. Thank you for that. We are going to move on to Nqobile, who I think is online.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am, Namonde.
Welcome.
Thank you. Should I begin?
Please go ahead.
Okay. I'm just checking. Can you all see my screen? Because you won't see me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. When I was asked to formulate a 10-minute, 12-minute presentation by Marie, it was her provocation. Please, everybody blame her for me being here. I thought maybe I should tell a story about how I came to teach in the way that I do. But listening to all my colleagues, I think maybe I'll keep it kind of tight and short and tell you not about me, but rather about the students for whom I've had the pleasure and privilege to teach over the last 15 years, and what work they've done and what hell and heaven I've put them through over the last 15 years. And use the north of Johannesburg and Alex as a kind of space in which to tell the story as best as I can. So, as with everything, it all starts in the studio, in the lecture hall, right? And I think it was interesting to hear Jabu talking about blurring and obliterating and eliminating boundaries between the university and the cities in which universities find themselves and the communities around universities. And I think when I was younger, I used to think that way. And lecturers at Wits, I don't know about anywhere else, go through this student evaluation process. And a lot of students were telling me, you're forcing us to do things that make us uncomfortable. We don't like interviewing people. And why are you making us go out into the field and speak to strangers or take photographs of things and look up instead of looking down when we're walking and all of this stuff? And I said, well, you're going to be a planner, you're going to be a spatialist, you're going to be an urbanist. And that involves being a people person, a people-centered person. And you need to learn how not to center yourself in the telling of other people's stories, but you need to humble yourself and learn humility and learn empathy and practice it in order to let people be free and offer a safe space for people to tell their stories. And then I looked at myself and I thought, well, how can I teach that if I don't make the lecture hall and the studio a safe space for the students to think through their ideas and for the students to develop a confidence in their position and in their perspective and in their ideas? And that really shifted things for me and the kind of metaphysics of learning and teaching. And so you'll see with the photographs that I'm showing you right now that I am not in the front of the lecture hall or the studio. I'm the one taking the photo from the back. And I think this is it's a critical kind of methodology or pedagogy that centers students and gives them confidence to speak their minds and to tell you a story in the way they want to tell the story, right? And then to figure out how you do that, but also to get the hard stuff, you know, the readings, the data, the maps, the photographs, and make the whole process of finding out what it is to be an urban planner, a spatialist, a designer, an urbanist fun. Because if you don't make it fun and if you don't make it resonate, the lesson won't stick. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do as practitioners, as lecturers, as professors, right? Is not just to dazzle, right? But also to learn and to make the lessons stick. And how do you do that? Well, took me about 15 years to figure that out. I think I figured it out last year. That's why I took those photographs. And I think one of the really brilliant methods that I learned from the professors in the school was to reshape this notion of what the seminar is and could be, right? Not just a space where people present their work, where people present their articles, that's all fine and well, but also to say, this is what I'm thinking about what I've read. This is what doesn't resonate with me. This is what I don't understand, right? A lot of academia and a lot of learning in the academic space is very difficult to internalize, and it's very intimidating. So how do you make the process of learning and perspective and reflection something that students can approach with confidence, right? So essentially what I started doing was to figure out different ways in which students can do the essay, right, and write the essay. I think I'm going to have to think of new ideas now with AI and ChatGPT. But when I was thinking about doing this in 2019, I thought, why not do a visual essay, a video essay? And in the process, try to get the students to reflect and rethink and reinterpret all the stuff that's coming at them. And I started to think about maybe the students like watching films. So I should think about, I'm sure Bernadette will talk about this when she responds, but for instance, thinking about transformation and linking that to the Transformers movie. How could you do that? Would you have to re-edit the script? Would you have to reshoot the movie? Would you write a review of the film that rethinks this whole notion of what transforming is? And that layers that kind of idea of transformation. If you're thinking about this, you can't see my cursor, but the black child, what do you do now? What do you know, right? Is about reflecting on post-racialism, because at the time, President Donald Trump had just been elected to his first term in office. And just before that, Barack Obama was president of the United States, and we were talking about a whole new post-racial society and what that's going to look like. And it seems now that we're going back to kind of alt-right ideas about politics and how politics is practiced. And so that kind of DVD was a discussion between 4 of the students about what this post means and if the post really exists. Does a post-apartheid South Africa really exist? Does a post-racial kind of city and society really exist, right? Is there a kind of post-feminist reality and so on? So rather than getting students to write essays, which is a very important skill to learn, I thought, well, this is honors year, this is 4th year. They are postgraduate students. They should know how to write an essay. So let's figure out new ways to do that. And that got me started on a whole lot of other initiatives. Chief among which was the collaborative book. So in 3rd year, at the height of COVID, I was thinking about how do you get students to collaborate and learn in solidarity, not just with the communities we were examining, which was Alex at that time. So Alex Bacluse, Santon, and Frankenwald, Region E of Johannesburg. work, right? But also how to learn in solidarity and to teach each other as you're going through this kind of really terrible lockdown experience. And along with Sarah, who I taught the politics course with, the politics course that our dear friend, Mr. Fredricks, was talking about. How do we do that, right? So how do we teach and learn at the same time while we're all sitting like we are now, online, in front of our computer screens, and make that a collaborative, integrative, long-lasting process? And I'll spare you the reading of the brief, but essentially what the students produced was an ebook, right? So it didn't just include writing, but also photographs that they had taken on a site visit that was held 5 days before the first lockdown in 2020, as well as kind of asking the reader to click on certain videos that they had taken, or videos that they had encountered online, perhaps on social media outlets, on YouTube and so on. And what they created was a 3D ebook, which I think was brilliant, actually. So I could click on something and it would take me to a YouTube page where there'd be a video explaining things like ecological modernization, or a video explaining the NEMA Act and so on. So I've done a lot of these kind of sexy things, but ultimately it is to get students to think more clearly, more interestingly about the environments in which they inhabit. And for them to teach me a few things about the people that they're interested in examining in their work and researching collaboratively, as well as all the kind of, I would call procedural things around ethics, and how we teach students to learn ethically and to teach collaboratively and to work collaboratively, not just as students, but also as professionals in their working environments. And it has been my pleasure and privilege to do that. So just in closing, Nomonde, do I have time to close, or should I shut up and give you the floor?
You can close. You can close.
Okay. I would say the privilege has been in decentering myself and my trauma and my struggles. And the joy has been in giving students their own voice, actually not even giving it to them, helping them discover the voice that was already there to begin with. And to make them confident enough to discover the world, not just the world in between their ears, which is most important, right? But the worlds in which they inhabit. And trying to see how their perspective shifts as a result of finding the voice that was already theirs. And lastly, what comes from saying the word yes. So say yes, my people.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. And thank you to Marie in particular for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. I was happy that you closed with that idea of confidence, because that's what I really wanted to say, that I think that this balance that you mentioned in the beginning about actually having the confidence to contribute something. Because obviously without confidence, you can't share what you have. But then without humility, you can't access anyone's personal realm or space. And, you know, the worst part is that you could not even be aware that you have not accessed the truth of someone's reality. So, you know, that image of the pedagogical approach that you've, you know, discovered after all these years, I think, and everything you said about it was quite powerful in communicating that idea between this tension between confidence and humility that, you know, we really have to embrace to get research right. Okay, so we'll be moving on to our respondents. Joining us online, Dr. Bernadette Johnson. Please go ahead.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and thank you very much for including me and inviting me. I'm just sharing my screen. Can you see that?
Almost.
Still loading.
No, not yet. Yes, now it's there.
Can you see?
Yes, thank
can.
you.
Okay, good. Okay, great. I also just put on my camera so that you can see who I am in case we meet in the street. At least you know what I look like.
Thank you for that.
Got to
Appreciate
switch
it.
my camera on. Can you see? Oh, there we go. That's me. Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Good to be here with you. So I'm just using the big screen to do this presentation. And I want to start off by, you know, when I was reading through Paulo's work, because I've had the opportunity of looking at his latest article. And thank you for sharing that with me. And thank you, Mari and colleagues, for inviting me. I'm really feel privileged to be part of this conversation, having heard what has gone before. And it just brought up for me the reflection that, you know, we're actually grappling with unshackling scholarship. The idea that how do we free ourselves as engaged scholars and develop engaged scholarship within the university. So my work is very much about in the transformation office and in the work that I've been doing, and my scholarship has really been about thinking around how do we do this? How do we enable environments in which engaged pedagogy can flourish? Because ultimately, it is an alternative, I think, to typical Western subconscious thinking around the meaning and the structuring of the university, which first and foremost happens within our minds. And I think the struggle that we find ourselves grappling with is not one peculiar to ourselves. It has long historical lineages, of course, linked to the very notion of how, in fact, the university's architecture is set up, and how removed it even appears in architecture. But the notion of pillars itself, holding the foundation together with a roof, is really this idea of the university as coming from, of course, medieval times, and how that architecture has been structured, and what kind of we have to caution kind of the thinking that it may take us to and kept trapped in. And I think all the work that you talk about is so important. It's important in relation to engaging with basically, as you've been saying, doing, unlearning, and I want to also think about undoing. The undoing of what is, or the demolishing. I think you've spoken about getting rid of the boundaries even between the university and communities. and there's a lot of literature in that space about, what is it that the university should actually be, for it to have any meaning within the context in which we live. And I think that what often we experience, and I see it in Paulo's work, and when often scholars talk about the university, is this frustration with the university, its systems, to enable this form of scholarship. Now, what makes this scholarship so important to my mind is that exactly what I think this previous speaker has just spoken about, this idea of getting closer to the self. And that the learning that we undertake in collaboration with others within real life experiential spaces, the notion of the subaltern space, the notion of the idea of a liberation, liberating the mind, Paulo Freire's ideas around that. I think, Paulo, you detail the kind of the pedagogy and all the progressive elements we can draw from, shaped by Latin America and liberation theology itself is very important. So when I think about the ways in which we are actually connecting with a sense of a holism, a sense of community, that the notions of Ubuntu, that this, we exist, it takes us completely out of Western subconsciousness around the ego, the self, and the obsession with the individualism, to a recognition that we can only do our work within the space of this connection. We can only grow, and we can only grow deeply and holistically through that connection, and that ultimately this way of connecting and therefore liberating ourselves, we are bringing the self into knowledge, and we are transforming the self in the process of learning. And I think that's what is most powerful about the methodology and thinking around engaged. We are participating in the creation of our own freedom and creating our own idea around who we should be becoming. And in that way, we find redemption ourselves from systems which are deeply oppressive. And so it is very typically a philosophy of science in its extreme form, thinking of an empiricism, would try inevitably to sanitize the notion that the self is brought into the discovery of knowledge, and the self through ideas around objectivity, distance, disconnection, which would enable one to see better, see clearer, and not get too involved, can be presented as this idea of a sanitized science. And so I think even the ways in which we have thought about, for some reason, this has got to happen, it's got to get stuck. We have thought about the university, and I want to go, given what you've said, I want to go to a slide here, which is some work I've done around thinking about. So for a few years, I worked with people within universities who think about community engagement offices in universities, in our system in South Africa, who think about how do you actually enable scholars like yourselves and scholars like ourselves who are committed to connection, who are committed to liberating pedagogy. And so a lot of what you were talking about, Paulo, in your paper, I find within the system. The ideas around funding. In our system in higher education, in fact, the third pillar or the third mission of universities is an unfunded mission. Teaching and learning is funded, and research is funded. And there's an assumption that this must be integrated. However, the logic of the system itself undermines it. For example, if I take you to the bottom line there on the institutional level, you'll see that we do not value and reward engaged scholarship in our staffing and promotion policy. You won't find it in our policy in the university. It takes much longer, given the nature of collaboration, co-production of knowledge, discovering. I think your research shows how in the process of doing the research, you work with context, you work with need, which starts to shape your epistemology, it shapes your methods that you use, it shapes time, and it tends to take longer time. The system works against this within its very neoliberal and corporative nature. You know, these words we use, but essentially it encourages an individualism. It doesn't encourage a collectivism in knowledge creation. And it's not recognized within our workload policy, within our rewards and incentives. In fact, often we are tripped up through, for example, issues around safety concerns, issues around insurance, and so on. So you'll see at the regional or national level, these ideas replicate themselves as barriers. And we tend to become very focused on the voices internally. In fact, even one of the critiques I think is important to note is that we tend to think of transformation, which we've now broken away from as Wits, and we think of community engagement from the vantage point of ourselves. We do not think enough about the ways in which we think about being engaged from the vantage point of communities enough. And so even this research that I've done here is taking into account barriers from the university. And this is what we now have to engage in as an institution. I want to take us to where we are at the moment as the university. We've changed our transformation pillars, and one of the pillars we've introduced is public engagement. The idea, as you show in your research, that we are connected. We are in an environment of a polycrisis, of multiple colliding crises of uncertainty and so on. It takes the place and space we occupy within the city and region is fundamental to how we move, we understand, we develop knowledge which is relatable and relevant to community. All of that means that we cannot just be busy with ourselves, with compliance issues, or which are very important, redress matters related to employment equity and BBBE. We have to do that. However, at the same time, we have to extend the work we do, how we do it within the broader environment, to start to ask questions about what this university is actually for. What is scholarship for? What are academics for? What is academia? What should an academic be? There are so many competing ideas around that notion in practice, as we see how the university morphs into units of entrepreneurship and innovation. And yet it has implications for the ways in which we work and think about who are we, who do we need to become in order to be useful, let me put it that way, in the world in which we work. Now, I do want to make another point that in being engaged, we do recognize that the nature of engaged scholarship doesn't present in the same way across all knowledge fields and disciplines. So disciplines and fields like yourself are more naturally disposed to engagement. Various fields within health sciences are naturally exposed. And so a lot of what we see in the university across universities in professional spaces are naturally. And so we have to understand that the complexities in this and that the systems themselves need to be changed. They don't make sense if you want to be a scholar of this order, because this scholarship isn't valued. So what I've started thinking about with colleagues is that if we want to see the university engaged and enable that, we develop our own scholarship around that. And so when we think about transformation, maybe to talk about this, is we think about how do we actually, we see ourselves as a transformation laboratory, as working with these notions of doing transformation, and that you're learning through doing. And I think one of the points inside the university we've started testing is the creation of in-between spaces. They're not the Senate, they're not the council. They are spaces that we co-create with academics in thinking about what their scholarship should be and creating movement and transformation around that. Learning from those experiences through doing, and then resetting constantly the transformation agenda. And I notice Paulo mentioned the idea of hotspots. We also think about hotspots and as places of potential conflict, even cultural warfare within the complexity of institutions. These institutions are so important because, and why we look at them and regard them as important is because we do see them as places where you can anchor. In many ways, our society needs anchoring. And perhaps universities are one of the few places where, and this is the middle article here, where we talk about the power of community engagement and how through anchoring our scholarship and using the notion of the quintuple helix, where in your instances, I can hear lots of engagement with communities, a variety of civil society, and within a specific community. In the space of the university, we will see linkages with government, industry, other universities, environmentally, as we've seen, focused because of the climate change catastrophe and the importance of being fully engaged on that issue. We know this at Wits, we've created space for that. But in all of this, as we are looking at and as we think about these different ways in which we engage and the multiple publics with which we engage, we've also created a program within the university called the MCAT program, in which we have started conversations with academics around thinking about their scholarship. If I have publics, who are these publics? Mapping out multiple publics and thinking about the scholarship and sharing ideas is a very interesting question that during Fees Must Fall, and I want to stop on maybe as a second last point, during Fees Must Fall, which one of the vice chancellors mentioned that not a single community came out to support, to make a comment about the university or to make a statement around, for example, it doesn't have to be the only statement, but please do not vandalize buildings, right? Because we need it for future generations. No community did that. If we look at the Forte situation at the moment, which is a national catastrophe and raises all sorts of political problems, it's another indication of how no community has come out to say, this is our university, stop doing it. Now, I can tell you, I'm an activist from the 1990s, highly influenced by Paulo Freire's work of the 80s. And as an activist and living and growing and being formed by the University of the Western Cape and as the University of the Left, which is what we called ourselves, we were highly connected to the communities. And if anything happened to the University of the Western Cape at the time, communities would defend it. It was very difficult to do anything in isolation or to isolate a university in that way. So the political importance of being engaged is really fundamental, because it says something about the ways in which we protect our public institutions, which are meant to serve generations and generations who will come after us. But the question is, how do these institutions survive during these periods, historically, in these historical moments, to demonstrate, to show that indeed scientists can be trusted, knowledge can be trusted, and that communities have an affinity to these institutions. And so that's really what shapes my commitment to this area, and also my commitment to, from the Transformation Office, exploring ways in which scholarship of this nature can be enhanced, can be enabled, can be supported, and can be rewarded. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bernadette. I think, the way you built on from Nqobile's talking about the self and the role, how elaborating or understanding the role of the self in the research is so important, and it actually adds very important texture to it. But I want to go back to this point of learning through connection. And the fact that we have a system that doesn't reward that connection, but then the relevance of our research actually depends on that connection. And I want to invite Mr. Makhubu, who is from the City Studio area, just to add some insights here. To follow the question, what does it mean for communities to host such endeavours? And thinking about that connection, I'm swapping the water a little bit here, but I think it's really important to get your views.
Thanks everyone. My name is Makhubu. It's the community leader, also women's settlement about the community. I want to thank everyone who's here in the house, and Prof. Mary and the team, Paul, and the student from the university. We feel very much appreciation on the event that is coming to our place as community leaders and the community at large. I think most of the community members, all us, were part of the search and walk about go straight just river and the fruit garden. I believe they more, or they have learned a lot from you guys from the university and the student. I cannot say a lot because we are still waiting for the date on the 28th of October to be part of that event on the community. We appreciate a lot what you have done to our patron team. Today they have a uniform from you guys, and then even the community hall we have chairs from this team. I think some you were not aware about this, but they donated us 20 chairs. and we have 2 shelters for the patrollers. When there is a rain or when the sun is too hot, they have somewhere to stay and rest. So we appreciate a lot team from that and the student. I cannot say a lot, but we still want to engage more community to come when you need them, to do the interviews and give you information more about the place where we are living. And even the other part of Book Garden, from Mr. Makonyan, he helped us a lot, and then I believe you encourage him a lot when you go to him and ask how we make it, how we engage the community, or to encourage them to be part of the food garden and to make food for the community and stuff, because they get those things very cheaper than to go to the or ShopRite and Checkers to buy a spinach or a cabbage. So can get a bunch of spinach even if you have 10 rand or this month, because it's within our community and stuff. So we appreciate your team from Prof and other lecturers and the student from outside the country. I remember 3 or 4 times we met with the student from Cape Town, Germany, and other outside South Africa, even UK. They came to see where people are living and ask more questions about how do you manage to live in this environment. So yeah, nothing more, but more appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we appreciate you just as much. We appreciate your willingness to answer our million questions, your willingness to really just share your life and your world. And I thought we would be able to do what you do without your warmth. So thank you. Thank you very much. And then finally and online again, let us welcome Juan Cristaldo, who is joining us online.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much to Marie, to all the team of Wits, for the great opportunity to share this morning for me, afternoon for you guys. It has been a real pleasure. I have been taking a lot of notes while you guys were presenting. Unlike Bernadette, I do not have a presentation and slides. I just want to share some thoughts and reactions, I guess, after seeing all that you are doing and your interests and your concerns, which very much also reflects some of our interests and challenges and construction processes, I should say. So again, just commend everybody for such a great and rich presentation. I want to begin by going through what Paulo has mentioned about unlearning by doing. And I guess for me, the reflection, the thought there is that's a very acute observation due to the fact that all learning process begins with an unlearning process, right? Like every time you improve your technique of anything, you're in reality, in a way, rearranging previous knowledge. So I think that's a very interesting concept. Um, Also, and this is something that through variations has been brought by many of our colleagues today, this idea of embracing uncertainty through the engagement and through going out to the world in a way. And I think that's also like a very interesting topic that we try to push forward in our practice and in the work we do with our colleagues. And especially considering this idea of academia or the lab or the artistic space or the community space, as I would say that, and this has to do with also with what Bernadette asked in the end, what is the uh, purpose? What is the university for, right? And I think one of our legitimate purposes is to be a space in which experimentation and quote unquote failure is allowed, right? Hopefully, it's even encouraged. So we have more latitude that in the so-called real world to experiment, to elaborate, to explore. So I think that's one of the things, and a key aspect on that is this notion of embracing uncertainty. Then, regarding the talk of Sarita, I think I believe that in this act of expansion from university to community, uh, I guess one critical point is to be able to exercise little by little, bit by bit, in a way, an extension of our communication capacities. So Sarita literally talked about the asset of being multilingual. Uh, and I guess that beyond the asset of being multilingual, which is no doubt a great asset, uh, in a way, is the asset of being multicultural. To be able to engage in practices, in conversations across different communities, across different, I would say, socioeconomical spaces in a way. So I think that that's a very powerful asset. And pedagogically, I think that's one of the things we want to teach to our students. Again, Sarah mentioned this idea of the discomfort of going to the war. Again, as I mentioned, is something that has been mentioned with variation by many of you. And I think, again, speaking from this point of view of pedagogy or working with students and communities, I think the advantage of engaging I would say, the quote unquote outside world of the university is, of course, helping learning also. But I think also there is a huge benefit of calibration. One of the critical things we do when we engage with the world is we calibrate ourselves, and we constantly need that. We need good friends, good mentors, good teachers, family members to help us calibrate our ideas, our thoughts, our behavior. So I think that's a key benefit of engaging with the community, is that it helps our epistemology to be calibrated against reality. How much do we know and how much we don't know? About what Ethan was presenting, I guess, in his work about water sanitation. Um, I think I like very much the notion of reciprocal learning. Um, One of the things we try to express always and say always is this idea there is beauty everywhere, or at least the possibility of beauty everywhere. And I also believe that there is expertise everywhere and sophistication everywhere. So it's is a shift in attitude to be open and receptive to that. And I think this is a very good approach of reciprocal, because it doesn't put the center neither in the university or merely in the community, but in the dialogue between these two spheres. About the presentation of Jabu, I think this very interesting experience of immersive work with communities and students. And I think very, very interesting this idea of integrating, I would say, the university, the community, and different layers of knowledge through experience. I think that's a very great concept. About what Nqobile was presenting as I highlight the notion of, again, once more, is this idea of forcing that the quote unquote, the teacher is a person who quote unquote force students to do things we don't like, which is this kind of gentle pushing towards the outside world towards uncertainty, towards what is new, towards what is growing space. And I also like it very much, this notion of the urbanist as a people's person. I think that's a very acute observation. And towards the end of her presentation, she mentioned, which is a beautiful thought, this idea of the privilege of intellectual activity as an act of decentering yourself. And I couldn't agree more. I believe that this is indeed one of the key aspects of research, of pedagogy, of working with communities is, if you allow me the joke, we become less neurotic through decentering from ourselves, right? Like, and in this being less neurotic, I don't know if we're happier, but we're significantly less miserable, I would say, and probably, hopefully, people around us also. So that's very interesting, very wise thing to see and to express. And also that in this act of decentering yourself, you can help others to find their voice, which is already there. And finally, from Bernadette, I think that these ideas of shifting from the ivory tower to being engaged, I really enjoyed you, Bernard, mentioning Teología de la Liberación, and which is a kind of a philosophy or a theology that is very close to our part of the world, but also the notion of Ubuntu, this idea that in reality the notion of ego or the isolated subject is not only unproductive, but is in rigor a mistake. Like this idea that we exist as isolated beings. In the most true, strict sense, we don't. There is enough kind of physical evidence, epistemological evidence, and huge bodies of philosophy and religion talking about that. But in the truest, more objective, pure physical sense, it is absolutely true. Like we don't exist as isolated subjects, so it's not only unproductive or I would say ethically complicated or politically complicated, but it's literally a mistake. And then, of course, as people living in the university or working in the university, Bernadette generously shares some of the challenges of the university. So this idea of what is the university for, and also this idea that when the community does not recognize us and does not defend us or as an institution, is because perhaps we're not reaching out as much as we should. I think that's a very powerful challenge in this, I would say, neo-right political context in the world, where science everywhere is under attack, where academic institutions are under attack, where expertise itself is under attack. So I think it's a very very provocative and very adequate reminder of the work we have to do in validating our institutions through service. I think I'll have to wrap up there. Say again that I really enjoyed hearing you. I'm really sorry that I cannot give more feedback about our colleague that is the community leader, for what I could understand, but it's because of the audio things I couldn't actually hear you. So I'm really sorry about that. But other than that, has been really a great pleasure to being with you, and starting to reaching out and helping build together these bridges of collaboration in the global south between post-colonial territories who share a lot of, I guess, similar potentialities and also similar challenges, similar scars, perhaps. I don't know if similar, but at least analog scars of history. So I would say that I really hope that this is the first of many opportunities to collaborate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all of the presentations and responses. We're significantly over time, but I think it's been worth it. I do want to allow for at least 1 or 2 reflections, comments, questions from the audience. Should anyone have one? Anyone online or anyone in the room? If anyone would like to say anything?
Just be doing that. Oh. Thanks for this word. I work for the city of Johannesburg. And it's sometimes so sad and frustrating when you find products of our universities coming to work in the city, and we think that they, especially the built environment ones, I think they are project managers. And that they are doing communities a favor by coming to serve. I don't understand why we do this to doctors and not do it to even workers that they actually should have compulsory community service. Because people think that architects and urban designers belong to the elites, when in fact they are funded by partly public money. And then think it will only, or at fancy times, that they will actually be servicing broader communities of the less well off. And I'm shocked at how professionals, built environment professionals in government, then, and you will find it in their language. There will be beneficiaries and these people and this kind of thing. It says something sad about how we are produced as a professional to serve communities. When you even speak to one story I will never forget is telling a colleague when we were looking at a piece of land that they ran in the park. As soon as he heard that we're looking at these pieces of land because we're looking for affordable houses, he screamed at us. Only later did we hear that actually the area that we're looking at is his neighborhood. And this is an official body. And the problems are sometimes just there. And how those people have been trained to serve. And who do they put, where do they put themselves up in the scheme of things? As saviors or as co-producers of these spaces?
Thank you. Thank you so much. A valuable insight from yet another perspective. Anyone online who would like to add? Okay.
A quick comment, but it's not really something we have time to engage in here. But Bernadette spoke about Wits University thinking through how kind of engaged pedagogy could be rewarded, incentivized, and I'm thinking the same with the city. How could how could the point scoring system, the performance management system, even in the city, kind of encourage a different approach. But I have a very deep-seated question whether that is possible, whether engaged research, the ethic of engaged research can be facilitated by a reward system or by a performance management system. It somehow has to, the calling has to sit deeper. And so I think what's so important is the pedagogy. If we don't manage to train our built environment professionals, we want to see Ethan in a few years' time being a manager. You know, is it that? Is it that, or are we still failing in pedagogy? Or where does the lever lie in changing it? Is it the politics of the day? Is it, you know, or will there always be the tension? I suppose there will always be the tension between some people that in their ethics are more individualized and will go that route, and others that won't, as long as, perhaps what Bernadette said is, as long as those barriers are lifted and it's not made quite so hard, that's already enough of a reward, perhaps, for more people to get involved in it. Or, yeah. Anyway, that's just a comment for further discussion in other forums. Thank you.
Thank you. Even though we can't carry on here, it's actually a good moment to mention that there is another city studio
Seminar.
Yes, next week. The title will be talking about alternative imaginaries, and then that's followed by the event that Mr. Makhubu mentioned on the 28th of October, and that is at Frankenwald. Yes, so feel free to join those and continue some of these conversations there. Thank you.